1 acre sounds too small for livestock. Most of the time it is. But the right animals in the right combination can make a single acre genuinely productive. Eggs, meat, pest control, real food coming off a piece of land smaller than a lot of backyards. The wrong animals do the opposite. They eat your budget, demand fencing and housing you didn't plan for, and leave you managing a problem instead of a homestead. Not every animal people associate with farming actually belongs on 1 acre. Some of them are about to get ruled out for reasons that aren't obvious until you look closely. And the animal that ends up on top won't be the biggest, the most productive per pound, or the most efficient with feed. It'll win for a different reason, one that only becomes clear once you see what it's up against. Let's start with the animals that ask more of an acre than an acre can give. Number 11, beef cattle. Cattle are the animal most people picture first when they think farm, which makes them a useful place to start, because they're also the animal a single acre can least afford. Extension guidance generally puts the pasture requirement for 1 beef animal somewhere between 1 and 2+ acres of quality forage, depending on soil, rainfall, and grass type. That's for 1 cow alone, with nothing else sharing the land. Once housing and fencing shrink your usable acre even further, you're often buying hay for most of the year just to keep 1 animal fed. At that point, you're not pasture raising a cow, you're storing one. Number 10, horses. Horses need a similar amount of land to cattle, sometimes more. And they come with a complication cattle don't have. They're not raised for food. Every other animal on this list earns its spot by producing something: eggs, meat, milk. A horse is a working or companion animal, which might justify the acreage on a larger property. On 1 acre where every square foot has to contribute, a large animal that doesn't produce anything is a much harder case to make than a large animal that does. Number 9, a full-size dairy cow. This is the hardest one to rank low because homemade milk and butter sound like exactly what a homestead is for. But the math barely moves from beef cattle, comparable or greater pasture needs, plus a strict twice-daily milking schedule that most people underestimate until they're living it. Smaller dairy breeds exist and reduce the footprint somewhat. Even accounting for that, asking 1 acre to support a dairy cow and anything else is asking too much of too little ground. So that's the case against the classic farm animal trio. All 3 ruled out for essentially the same reason: not enough land to support one, let alone a mix. From here, the calculation changes. The next animals need less space, but that doesn't automatically make them easy. Number 8, sheep. Sheep are considerably more space efficient than cattle. You can typically run more sheep per acre than cattle on the same ground. But space isn't the only variable. A small flock still needs room to rotate, and rotation is the primary defense against internal parasites, one of the most consistently cited challenges in sheep management guidance. On 1 acre, there's often not enough room to rest a paddock long enough to break that cycle, which means more deworming and more vigilance than a beginner typically expects. Sheep aren't impossible here, they're just a harder animal than their smaller size suggests. Number 7, pigs. Pigs introduce a genuinely different kind of advantage: efficiency at converting scraps, spoiled produce, and feed into meat, in a footprint far smaller than cattle or sheep need. That's real and it's valuable, but pigs root. Left alone, they'll turn a grassy area into bare dirt within weeks, which means fencing has to be built to contain a determined animal, not just a wandering one. They're usually raised as a seasonal batch rather than a permanent flock, and most pig raising leans heavily on purchased feed rather than what the land itself provides. Pigs make sense for someone specifically chasing meat and willing to manage the mess that comes with it. They're not a just get some pigs default. Number 6, turkeys. Turkeys sit close to chickens in their basic setup. Similar predator-proof housing, similar general care, but they eat noticeably more per bird to reach a similar-sized flock's total meat output, and most experienced keepers consider the young poults a bit more delicate to raise than chicks. That closeness to chickens matters because it's the first hint of a pattern that's about to repeat several times on this list. Birds overall ask less of an acre than mammals do. Turkeys prove the rule works. They just don't prove it as well as what's coming next. Number 5, goats. Here's where the acreage math finally starts working in the animal's favor. Goats are browsers, not grazers. Turn them loose on brush, brambles, and weeds, and they'll thrive on ground a cow or sheep would consider worthless. On an imperfect acre, that's a genuine advantage no animal ranked above this point has offered yet. The trade-off is fencing. Goats are notorious for finding the one weak point in an enclosure, and a homestead's reputation with the neighbors often depends entirely on how seriously that fencing was built. Get it right, and goats produce milk or meat on surprisingly little land. Get it wrong, and you'll spend more time retrieving goats than raising them. That's 5 animals down, and a clear pattern has emerged. Land requirement drops, but a new complication takes its place every time. Parasites, mess, appetite, escape proofing. The next 4 animals break that pattern. They're smaller, they're birds, and for the first time on this list, the complications start shrinking along with the space they need. Number 4. Geese. Compared to nearly every other animal on this list, geese get an unusually large share of their diet from grazing grass rather than purchased feed, a real cost advantage on a small property. They're also used, quite literally, as living weeders, turned loose in orchards or garden rows to graze weeds without touching the crops anyone actually wants. And they make loud, alert, remarkably effective watch animals, whether you asked for that or not. The trade-offs are seasonal egg-laying and territorial behavior during breeding season. But for the specific combination of low feed cost and grass-to-food conversion, geese are hard to beat. And they're the first animal on this list where the disadvantage column is genuinely short. Number 3. Ducks. Now the real competition for the top spot begins. Ducks are generally hardier against common poultry illnesses than chickens. They forage aggressively enough to make a real dent in garden pests. Slugs and insects mostly don't survive near a small duck flock, and their space footprint is small enough to sit comfortably on almost any acre. The one real consideration is water. Ducks are happier and cleaner with access to something to bathe in, which doesn't need to be elaborate, but does need to be planned for. If your acre has a pest problem in the garden and you want eggs at the same time, ducks solve both with a single animal. On usefulness alone, they're a legitimate case for the top of this list. Number 2. Rabbits. Which brings us to the animal we mentioned at the very start. Small, quiet, and arguably the most space-efficient meat producer on this entire list. Rabbits are typically raised in raised hutches or compact colony pens rather than open pasture, which means their land footprint is smaller than almost anything else here, ducks included. Their feed-to-meat conversion is among the best of any common homestead animal, and they reproduce quickly enough that a small breeding group can produce meat at a pace nothing else on this list matches on the same amount of ground. They're also quiet, which matters more than people expect if your acre happens to have neighbors within earshot. So here's the real question this ranking has been building toward. If rabbits use the least space and convert feed the most efficiently, and ducks solve 2 problems at once with almost no downside, why isn't one of them number 1? Because most efficient and most useful to the average beginner aren't the same thing. Rabbit meat isn't part of most households' habits, which means the barrier for most people isn't practicality, it's willingness. And ducks, for all their strengths, produce one thing well. Eggs. The animal that wins this ranking has to do more than perform better on paper. It has to be the animal a total beginner can succeed with, using the least specialized knowledge, the most available support, and the widest range of outcomes if things don't go perfectly. Number 1. Chickens. Not because they're the most efficient, because they're the most complete answer to the actual question this video started with. What belongs on one real acre, managed by someone doing this for the first time? A small flock needs comparatively little room, on par with ducks or geese. They produce both eggs and, if you choose, meat, from the same basic setup. Something neither ducks nor rabbits do on their own. Feed, housing, and breed information are more widely available for chickens than for any other animal on this list, which matters enormously the first time something goes wrong and you need an answer fast. They'll work a garden for you, scratching up pests, turning kitchen scraps into compostable manure. And unlike every animal ranked above them, a productive flock genuinely fits within the footprint an acre has left over after housing, fencing, and everything else takes its share. Ducks may be more resilient. Rabbits may be more efficient. But chickens are the animal with the fewest ways to go wrong and the most ways to be useful. And on a first attempt at 1 acre homesteading, that combination beats efficiency every time. So here's the actual lesson underneath the ranking. There's no single animal that's the right answer for every 1 acre homestead. The right choice depends on what you actually want to produce, how much feed you're willing to buy versus grow, how much time you have for daily management, your climate and pasture quality, and if we're honest, your own tolerance for chasing an escaped goat down the driveway. This ranking isn't a rule book. It's a way to weigh those trade-offs against your own land, instead of choosing an animal just because it's the one everyone pictures when they hear the word farm. If you're planning your own 1 acre homestead, that's the real skill. Not raising everything you can fit. Matching the animal to the land. If this helped you think through your own setup, stick around. Homestead Harvest is where we work through decisions like this one, honestly, before you make them.